I know there's a couple of more people who are going to wander in, but welcome. I'm Sue Flocke, and I'm an associate professor with the Prevention Research Center for Healthy Neighborhoods. I'd like to welcome you to our first seminar for 2018. And we might need to shut that because they still are doing construction. Thanks. But welcome. It's nice to see some familiar faces here. If you've not been here before, welcome to you. There is a sign-up sheet outside. Please do sign in so we can monitor who's coming. And also, if you are new, we can get you on a list to let you know about upcoming presentations and opportunities, both for the seminar, but also for other kinds of opportunities that might be of interest to you. This seminar I'm particularly excited about because we're getting a chance to present some findings from a study that I lead, and we have got an enormous team behind this effort. And what I'm excited about is that we're going to get a chance to showcase a whole variety of different findings from this, but just as a taste of some of the things that are beginning to come out of the study that we call the Little Cigar study. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. We have several presenters that we'll do in sequence, and then we'll open it up for discussion and questions at the end. So for right now, I'm going to suggest that you hold on your questions from each presentation. We'll bring everybody back up, and you can ask either questions about specific presentations or broader ones, and hopefully we'll have a very lively conversation around some of the findings from this. So let me go ahead and get started. And again, I've labeled this initial findings from the Little Cigar study. About a year ago, Elizabeth Antonelli did present on some of the qualitative findings that helped set up this stage of research, and we're going to give you a smattering of things to share just today. So just as some background, you all may recognize that tobacco is the #1 cause of preventable morbidity and mortality in the United States and actually across the world. And it's the chemicals in tobacco products that are harmful to multiple organ systems. You name the chronic disease, and tobacco is generally a contributor to that chronic disease. But it's actually the nicotine in the tobacco products that is the addictive component. Okay, so we're going to be talking a bit today about nicotine and nicotine dependence. And the reason that these tobacco products and combustible, or things that you burn, smoke, and inhale are particularly addictive is that there's a very rapid delivery of nicotine to your brain receptors in consuming these products in that way. There are many, many additives in these tobacco products that help accelerate and accentuate that response. But it's really the nicotine that is the dependence-causing agent within tobacco products. And we define nicotine dependence as an inability to stop. It could also be defined as cravings for tobacco and strong urges to smoke. So use of tobacco products other than cigarettes is definitely on the rise. And our talk today is very focused on cigarillos, and I've got some pictures of cigarillos on the bottom, often called black and milds. There's a comparison chart to cigarillos with large cigars being on the bottom and little cigars, or these little brown cigarettes at the top, for just a visual of the difference in these products. But these cigarillos are predominantly smoked by young adults and adolescents. We also know that cigarillo users have different smoking patterns, slightly different beliefs and practices from cigarette smokers. So the overall goal of our study is trying to understand the degree of nicotine dependence among cigarillo users so that we can inform regulation of these products, and that the products are regulated differently than cigarettes currently, and also inform some communication strategies about the potential harm of these products. So what we had planned to do with this study is to develop and test a measure of nicotine dependence that's valid and reliable for adolescents and young adult cigarillo users, in that one does not exist. Existing measures out there have been predominantly developed with cigarette users. So we saw a major gap in the literature and wanted to address that. As I alluded to earlier, we've had multiple phases for this study. The first phase was to conduct some in-depth interviews about smoking practices and beliefs. We interviewed 60 individuals, 30 young adults and 30 adolescents, adolescents being 14 to 18-year-olds, to really understand in their words what the experience is like using cigarillos, some of their beliefs, and just patterns that they engage in. The second phase was to administer a survey around nicotine dependence, as well as a variety of other measures, to begin to understand what that looks like from a quantitative perspective. The third phase was to validate the measure using biological markers of nicotine use, and we're collecting saliva to be able to assess cotinine levels. And then the fourth piece was to implement the measure into the YRBS, or the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, to evaluate nicotine dependence among school-aged youth. So you can see in the right-hand column our progress to date. We are in the third year of a 4-year study, nearing completion of our survey. Today, we're mostly going to be sharing findings from the second phase. Just to give you an overview of the methods, and folks that present will share methods that are really specific to what they're presenting. But we conducted a web-based survey. We used social media ads driven by Facebook and Twitter. We geographically targeted areas with very high levels of adolescent and young adult cigarillo use. And we list the different areas that were targeted. And I put a couple of stars in the map just to give you a sense of where those folks were coming from. In order to be eligible for the survey, individuals needed to be within the right age range, and that was 14 to 28. And they had to smoke at least 2 cigarillos per week. So we had a fairly low threshold for inclusion with regard to the amount of product that they were smoking. There were 2 parts. Participants completed what we called a screener survey to first determine eligibility, and then if they were eligible, we went ahead and released to them and sent them a link to a survey, and they can complete the overall survey. I list here survey domains, and these are just quite broad, but these are the categories of things that we included in the survey. We're not going to report on all of these today. We selected just a couple, but I wanted to give you a sense of the breadth of information that we got. We certainly got information on demographics. We got lots of detailed information around product use. Which of these products are they using? How much? Do they use it by themselves? Do they share it? We also measured nicotine dependence. That's what the main study was about and what we said we were going to answer. We also added on a variety of other questions around self-identity as a smoker, perceived addiction, risk, age of initiation, those kinds of things. And then some other concepts relevant to tobacco use, including coping expectancies and social motivations. The other piece that we added in that was a bit beyond what we had proposed to do for the grant application was marijuana use and co-use with tobacco. From prior work, both from this team and Dr. Trappel's team, had really identified co-use of cigarillos with marijuana. So that was something that we wanted to explore. Okay, so an overview of what we're planning to do today. We're going to share some specific findings around social media recruitment methods, a detailed versus a conventional approach to measuring the amount that people are smoking, a presentation around self-identity as a smoker, and then a qualitative study of deeper understanding of first experiences with smoking cigarillos. So we're going to move through these presentations somewhat quickly, but we're hoping that it will give you a flavor of the wide variety of things that we're learning and some of the early findings, and then we'll just go ahead and open it up for discussion. Okay, so with that, the first person up is David Cavallo. I'm just going to leave that there, unless you want to wear it.
No, it's okay. Okay, how many people in the room have a social media account? Raise your hand. How many people have ever clicked on an ad on a social media account? Less. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about how we recruited participants for this study with a focus on social media. Okay, so a little bit of background in terms of the rationale. So why did we choose social media? Okay, so if you look at little cigar use, you can see that, as Sue already mentions, predominantly young people that use little cigars. There's not exactly a linear relationship, but clearly people that have lower income have a higher prevalence of the use of little cigars, and people have lower levels of education too. Okay, so we kind of knew, in a sense, who our audience was, and we were thinking about, how can we effectively recruit this group of people. Okay. So I'm a person that does a lot of research in social media, and we know that social media has become sort of ubiquitous in terms of its use in the past 10 years, right? So I think Facebook has about 2 billion users worldwide. Okay, so a lot of people use social media, and who are those people? So clearly, there are a lot of young people using social media. Okay, we know that. Okay, if you have kids, you probably realize that your kids spend all their time on social media, right? There are some adults that spend all their time on social media as well. But we knew that that would be a rich sort of pool of people that we could recruit for this particular study. We also know that social media has pretty good penetration with lower income individuals, as well as people that have lower levels of education. Okay, so if you look at different kinds of recruitment strategies in terms of channels or communication channels that you would use, social media is actually one of the most equitable ones that you can use. Okay, so we thought they would be effective in that sense as well. This is just some data on the different platforms that people use. I don't have crosstab data on this by age, but Facebook is really still the 800-pound gorilla in terms of social media, and this shifts a little bit over time. It shifts by age group, but it's still really a major player in terms of how many people it reaches and how many people use it. And then Instagram and Twitter as well have pretty good penetration, as you can see from when I asked you guys that question at the beginning. Okay, so the purpose of this presentation for this part of the study really was to look at the effectiveness of using different social media platforms to recruit our audience. Okay, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So Sue talked about this already a little bit, but I just wanted to point out that when we started out, we really didn't have a conceived geographical limitation. So that's another thing that sort of limited itself to the social media recruitment, is that you can run advertisements on a national basis, right? And this particular study lends itself to that because these people are taking an online screener and an online survey. So they don't really need to be physically here. And so social media lends itself well to that. Okay? So our strategy was to run a variety of different advertisements. I'm not really going to present today on sort of the theoretical background of this, but we really wanted to choose a couple different characteristics of ads to compare. One was whether or not they contained a cigar image. Okay, one was differences in gender, whether or not there was a sort of an image that depicted somebody smoking in the advertisement, and then sort of groups versus individuals. So we developed this campaign. Sue talked about the different geographies that we used. And the way that the campaign worked is that we ran the advertisements equally. Okay, and I mention that because what these social media platforms will do for you, if you want them to, is you can put 6 ads into the queue and they start to run them. And then they look at which ones are most effective. And they start to run those more. Okay? So from a practical perspective, if you wanted to do this, you could just use that algorithm-based advertising strategy, and that would, in a sense, sort of maximize the effectiveness of your ads. We wanted to be able to make a direct comparison of these ads, so we ran them all equally. Okay, but normally that's probably not what you would do. You would just let Facebook sort of decide which ones are performing the best. The other thing that you can do with social media is you can target. Okay, so you can target on a lot of different things. Obviously, you can target on age, which we did. But you can also target on people's interests and keywords. Okay, so social media platforms, as most of the people in the room are probably aware, they mine your data, right? So they mine your conversations, they mine the things that you like, and they have sort of a profile of you that tells them what they think you're going to be interested in, okay? And so you can target ads to these platforms based on those keywords and interests. And we spent about $240 a day across Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So the way that we do the research is really quite elegant and nice. Okay, social media platforms, they all have data analytics for advertising. Okay, and they have very good sort of quantitative analytics that can tell you a lot of things about the advertising campaign that you're running and how it's performing. Okay, the things I'm going to focus on today are a couple different things. One are what were the costs, okay, for each ad. And then they also will give you different variables. The one that's most relevant to this presentation is what we call impressions. Okay, so impression is every time that somebody sees your ad. Okay, and then we derived some variables for this particular analysis, and we really picked, I guess, sort of two time points in the process of recruitment. One was how many people completed screeners from each one of these ads, right? And we have a way of tracking that. And then how many people ended up with an approved survey based on the ad that they came through. Okay? So those are the 2 time points that we used for this particular analysis. There are a lot of other things you could look at, but we thought that those were relevant because it's sort of the beginning of the process and then kind of what's the final end result. Okay? So this is just a flow diagram of the study. This includes a very small amount of non-social media recruitment, so the numbers won't match a little bit, but they're very similar. You can see that people started about 6,000 screeners, then we had about 3,000 valid screeners, and then about 1,200 people started the survey, and as of this point we have about 680 people who have finished the survey. Okay, so, and this is predictable. You're not going to get everybody who screens through, obviously, to come through and complete the survey. Okay, these are the participant demographics. You can see that they're primarily young adults, about half and half in terms of gender. And then we had a pretty good representation in terms of diversity with race ethnicity. Okay, and this is something that we were really particularly interested in as to whether or not this type of recruitment would generate some diversity in the sample, and it appears that it did. Okay, so these are just some data on sort of this concept of effectiveness. Okay, so this first slide is really talking about effectiveness in terms of completed screeners. So what we did was we wanted to draw some contrast by the platform that we used. I'll just mention that when I put Facebook up here, that includes Instagram, because Facebook and Instagram are really just one thing now. Okay. And then we looked at differences by gender, and then we looked at some of the different differences by content. Okay. So you can see when we look at just the number of people who completed screeners, there was really no statistically significant difference between Twitter and Facebook. Okay. If you look at gender, you can see that in general, the campaign seemed to be more effective with females than it was with males. And then if you look at the content in the ads with a cigarillo image in them, okay, so the ones that just have the picture of the cigarillo, were clearly more effective than the other ads. Okay, and you'll see that throughout the rest of this presentation. Okay. Then this sort of final endpoint, which is, from a practical perspective, you're really interested in, like how many people actually ended up with an approved survey, okay, and where did they come from, okay? And when you do this analysis, you can see it's a little bit different. So when you look at approved surveys, you'll see that Facebook was more effective than Twitter, okay? There's no difference by gender, and then again, you see this pattern where the cigarillo image is clearly more effective than the other types of images in the ads. And then another thing that I want to present that I think is really, really important, especially for people who are interested in doing this, is the cost effectiveness. Okay? And these data are kind of interesting. You can see that Facebook is cheaper than Twitter. Okay? And this adds up, actually. If you sort of extrapolate this out across 1,000 participants, it's quite a lot of money. Okay? It was a little bit cheaper to recruit females than males, obviously because that was more effective. And then you can see this is where you really see a big difference. So this cigarillo image, it's a lot less expensive to get results from that image than is the other images. Okay. So the implications of this, one is that this was effective. okay, we did get a diverse sample, and we have been able to recruit sufficient number of people through this method. Okay. If you look at other data from studies of the cost effectiveness, the cost effectiveness in this study was similar to other people who have recruited using social media. There's some differences in terms of the effectiveness of these ads depending on what point you decide to measure that at. Okay. In our case, in terms of approved surveys, Facebook was more effective than Twitter was. That being said, it is possible that people saw ads on both platforms and then finally just clicked through one of the ads on Facebook. Okay, we can't say for certain that that's all they saw. Also, there are clearly probably some people that are on one platform and not on another platform. Okay, so I think in general the recommendation is that you use both, but you have to have some understanding that one might be more effective than the other. And including a cigarillo image was the one thing that across all the analysis was consistently most effective. And so that seems to draw people's attention, okay, and that was really effective. So that's it for me. Thank you.
So next up we have Elizabeth Antonelli.
Okay, I am going to talk about two methods of measuring cigarillo use. So with the growing awareness of increasing cigarillo use, most studies are really focused on documenting smoking status, usually with a yes or no question. The overall aim of this study was really, though, to understand exposure to tobacco. So we're learning that behavioral patterns associated with cigarillo use are quite different from those associated with cigarettes. So the question that we were really interested in having our data answer was, how do we accurately measure how much cigarillo users are smoking? So there is no gold standard for measuring tobacco consumption, but there is a widely used measure that consists of two questions, and it's been adapted from cigarette use. One is on how many days of the last 30 days have you consumed part or all of the cigarillo, and then secondly, on those days, how many were smoked per day on average. There are some challenges, though. Sue mentioned we did some qualitative research. We did 60 in-depth interviews in phase 1 of this project. And some of the things that we learned here actually present challenges to measuring cigarillo consumption. So first of all, product terminology. Most people don't refer to what they're smoking as cigarillos. They refer to them possibly by brand name. Also, product manipulation. It's not all that common to smoke a cigarillo as is right out of the package. A lot of times it's manipulated to take out some or all of the tobacco and sometimes replace it with marijuana or a combination of marijuana and tobacco. Product sharing is another thing that we are really coming to learn more about. This actually seems to be the norm, to share cigarillos with other people in a group rather than smoking it by yourself. And then finally, variability in smoking behavior patterns. So for example, smoking more on the weekend than during the week. So how do we address these challenges? With regard to product terminology, you can include pictures of the actual cigarillo products and other cigar products, and then include brand names, like Black and Milds, because that's often how people refer to it. You can be really explicit and asking about tobacco-only products. Here's a picture. Here's the way we address these issues. You can see that we provided pictures and brand names, and at the top you can see we were explicit in saying tobacco only, not using the product as marijuana. And how do you address product sharing? Well, you can ask whether they use the product alone or in a group. And to address variability in smoking behavior, you can ask about use each day rather than on average over the 30 days. So the purpose of this particular study was to compare the conventional tobacco consumption measure that I just showed you to a more detailed consumption measure that accounts for the cigarillo sharing and also accounts for the variability in smoking behavior patterns. So how did we do this? This is a screenshot from the first of the detailed measure questions. As you can see, we asked about use by yourself, with others, or both. And then based on your response to that, if you were a group smoker, we went ahead and asked about how many people were in your sharing group and how many cigarillos were smoked per session. We also used or adapted a strategy called timeline followback, which asks folks to look at each day of the week and talk about what they typically would smoke on that particular day of the week. And we did this for both the group and the individuals. So we asked both these sets of questions. They were in different parts of the survey. Everybody answered both sets of questions. And then we basically computed the average number of cigarillos smoked per day for each of those measures. So here's just some sample characteristics. I especially wanted to point out, with regard to product use on the right there, less than a third of folks never share their cigarillos. So it's very common behavior. 46% do some sharing, 26% only share when they smoke. Daily tobacco use is about split half and half. Many folks use multiple products. And then with regard to the level of cigarillo use, a little over half only smoke one or less per day. And then we've got 31% smoking between 1 and 3, and 13% smoking more than 3 per day. So we wanted to compare these two measures across the behaviors that we're interested in. First of all, overall, we found that there is actually a difference. It's a small but significant difference, with the conventional measure yielding a higher average daily consumption rate of 1.32 compared to 1.25 for the detailed measure. We also found some interesting things with regard to product sharing. For those who don't ever share, the conventional measure had a higher average rate than the detailed. Some sharing, it was kind of flipped, with the detailed measure having a higher rate. And then only sharing, it was higher for the conventional measure. We also found daily tobacco use to be significant, with no daily tobacco use having a higher rate for the detailed measure than the conventional measure. And then finally, we found differences with regard to the level of cigarillo use. So for both moderate and high, it's kind of flipped, with the detailed measure yielding higher averages per day than with the conventional method. So when we do a multivariate analysis and put all the variables together, which characteristics are most important? Within the race category, we interestingly found that for the other category, conventional was higher than the detailed. We also found that for those who only share, the conventional was higher than the detailed. For those with daily tobacco use, it was the same. Conventional was significantly higher than detailed. And then once again, for both the moderate and the high, it was flipped, with the detailed higher than the conventional. So overall, basically, there's a small difference between the two measures with regard to cigarillo consumption. And so the conventional method works fine, but if you're interested in specific subgroups, or you're really asking a research question that requires detail with regard to consumption, you might want to consider the detailed method. There is no gold standard, and there's really just pros and cons to each. I think the conventional method obviously uses 2 questions. I think we used up to 32 or so for the detailed method, so it takes considerably longer and takes up more space. And that's it. Thank you.
So next up is Rock Lynn, who's going to talk a little bit about smoker identity and what we dub phantom smokers.
Okay, so one of the sort of more cognitive aspects of this study was we were looking at identity, self-perception. So everyone in our sample is a smoker, is an active smoker, but how do they perceive their own smoking behavior and their own identity in light of that? So identity, there's a lot of definitions for identity. It's pretty complicated. So for our purposes here, we're pretty much just boiling it down to a simple question: who am I? What is your answer to that question? And what generates an identity? Well, again, it's a lot of stuff, but the most relevant things here are your norms and attitudes of your society, the people around you, what do people expect, your own actions, your interpretations of what you do, your own behavior, that feeds into your identity, and your expectations about what's going to happen. And then there begs a big question: what if there are aspects to your identity that you don't like, that you don't want to accept, such as smoking? So identity and behavior can be kind of seen as a feedback loop. Again, it's very, very complicated. This is an extremely simple model, but you can think of it in that way. And when unexpected behaviors or outcomes come up, then that can lead to a state of cognitive dissonance or mental stress that you need to address. And related to this, anti-smoking campaigns have increasingly stigmatized smoking in this country, and so therefore smokers need to reconcile their behavior with the increasing social stigma, as well as their understanding that smoking is unhealthy. And that leads to something that's been dubbed a phantom smoker, which is people that actively smoke but do not self-identify as a smoker, that they don't apply that label to themselves. So some research has been done on phantom smokers in cigarettes. And so what are their characteristics? Well, typically, your phantom smoker is going to smoke a lesser amount, and they're going to smoke less frequently than what you could call an identified smoker. So that's to say, they're going to smoke less in terms of, amount, and they may smoke irregularly or only socially, stuff like that. And which leads into the second point: they tend to smoke more socially than alone, and they're less likely to have attempted to quit. And then in terms of beliefs about the self, typically phantom smokers are going to show a lack of understanding or denial of risks. They don't really get exactly how much trouble they're putting themselves in by smoking irregularly. They're going to be resistant to anti-tobacco messages, oftentimes because they don't view these messages as relevant to themselves, because if they don't see themselves as a smoker, why are you telling me to quit? I'm not a smoker. And oftentimes they don't see a need to quit or believe they've already quit. I personally know people like this who smoke every once in a while. They say, I only smoke when I'm drunk. I'm not a smoker. So how did we assess this in our survey? So we asked them a few direct items specifically related to phantom smoking. We asked directly, do you consider yourself a smoker? Yes or no question. Are you concerned about becoming addicted to smoking? We asked, and how confident are you that you could quit smoking cigarillos if you wanted to? And then we also gathered other relevant data that wasn't directly asked in reference to phantom smoking, but is relevant to this topic, which was group versus individual smoking, how much they smoked, and the products that they preferred, which is to say, cigarillos, cigars, little cigars, all that. So this is our data that we got from. As you can see up at the top, most of our sample was identified smokers, 77.8%, but we did have a pretty significant chunk of phantom smokers represented in our sample. Again, remember, even people that said no to the question, are you a smoker, they all smoked cigarillos in this sample. As you can see in the first graph, phantom smokers are much likelier to smoke solely in groups. In the central graph, we found something that I've personally found very interesting, is that you can see in the very, very middle, those that smoke cigarettes and cigarillos are much likelier to self-identify as a smoker, and which is going to tie into the perception of cigarillos. And in the final one, you can see, as expected, phantom smokers smoke less per week than identified smokers. We also found a little bit of information about addiction and quitting. As you can see in the first graph, phantom smokers are much less concerned about becoming addicted. And as you might expect from someone that does not view themselves as a smoker, they're far less likely to report already being addicted, while a good chunk of identified smokers did tell us, yeah, I'm already addicted, I smoke regularly. As you can see in the central graph, the phantom smokers are less likely to have tried to quit in the past, but interestingly display more confidence in their ability to quit. And that bears out with research with phantom smokers in cigarette smokers. So how does this work? It's possible that this could be tied into the plurality of identities. As a lot of you probably know, people cycle through identities depending on context, what's important in this specific context. And that ties into the people's ability to minimize risks in their own minds. So if you're in a situation where smoking may be advantageous, such as situations when you're out with people and it's a social lubricant, brings you together, it's culturally significant, you could take on temporarily a smoker identity, but then outside of that context, when you don't want to face the health problems that you're putting yourself through, then you can take on the identity of a non-smoker. This also ties into quitting messages, because a lot of times, depending on the contextual identity taken on by the recipient of the quitting message, they might not be super receptive to it. And I did want to touch on, again, that interesting link with cigarettes. Most of the quitting campaigns that you see out there are really focused on cigarettes, so there's a possibility, we thought, that smoking and smoker might be tied into cigarettes specifically, and people might not really broaden that to any tobacco products at all. As you can see, fewer phantoms reported smoking cigarettes in the past 30 days than identified smokers. And so it might be that while anti-cigarette ads and anti-smoking campaigns have been very effective, they might not be getting the entire message out that any tobacco use is dangerous, and really people are just focusing on what's the imagery and wording that's specifically shown to them, which is referring to cigarettes. And so the practical takeaway from this is that when assessing people's smoking behavior, it may not be effective to ask, are you a smoker? People might actively smoke but still tell you, I am not a smoker. And so it might be better to ask specifically about the behavior. When it comes to getting people to quit, conventional quitting messages may be ineffective, as we talked about a little bit ago. And when it comes to prevention of people taking up smoking, it might be important to specifically lay out that all tobacco products are dangerous, not just cigarettes. Smoking anything is going to make you a smoker. And that's it.
Awesome. All right. Last but not least, Sarah Gonzalez is going to change gears a little bit and present some qualitative data that were derived from the screener survey.
So I'm going to be talking about initiation experiences, and particularly positive experiences upon initiation of use of little cigars and cigarillos. So there is literature out there on the initiation to cigarettes and the positive experiences around this. And in the literature, this is usually described as a rush or a buzz, relaxation, dizziness, and other research asks individuals who are cigarette users if they liked their first experience of using that cigarette. This research has also found that if cigarette initiation was at an earlier age, it's more likely to be related to more pleasurable early experiences of use. Positive experience of initiation to cigarettes has also been linked to future nicotine dependence, as well as continued and regular use of cigarettes. There's been one recent study that also found that positive first experiences, using the terminology that is associated at the top with cigarettes, with cigar products, was associated with current use of cigar products. This study looked at hookah, e-cigarettes, and cigarettes as well, and only found this association with cigars and cigarettes. So the purpose of this presentation was to understand how cigarillo users describe their initiation, as well as to explore the relationship between initiation experience and current product use. So some of the numbers that you're going to see in this presentation don't match some of the other presentations based on when the analysis was completed for this presentation. But for this presentation, we had a total of 2,672 valid screeners. And in the screening, individuals were given a space to write a response. It was quite a large space, so they could write a lot for their narrative. To the prompt, please provide a brief description of how you got started smoking little cigars or cigarillos, such as Black and Mild, Swisher Sweets, or Hats Off. We are interested in hearing things such as how you got your first cigars or cigarillos, how old you were when you started, or how long it took for smoking to become a habit. So we took those responses and we qualitatively coded them for emergent themes. And the responses were coded independently by 2 coders, and any differences in the coding was discussed between the coders, and a consensus was determined between the coders for the final coding. Analysis for this presentation focuses on 2 categories: positive first experiences, as well as narratives that described having an immediate habit after first use. And it's important that the categories are not mutually exclusive. In these narrative, individuals could discuss both of these categories, and we did have a few that fell in that realm. We also did descriptive statistics to look at main survey completion rates among these groups, the demographics, and current cigarillo use. So of the 2,600 valid screeners, 117 fell into the positive first experience group, and 42 were in the immediate habit group. And then there are about 2,500 other responses. So it's important to note that we didn't, these were emergent categories, and we did not prompt individuals to talk about their feelings upon use or even ask them about whether they liked their first experience or didn't. So those in the 2,500 other responses didn't necessarily not have a positive experience. We just don't know that because it wasn't asked of them. It's not what emerged in their narratives about initiation. So if that, you might be wondering what the other groups did talk about. So they talked about their age at first use, the access to their first little cigar, cigarillo, the amount of the product or time it took to become a habit if it wasn't immediate, their choice to use or try the product, their current use of the product, flavors and smells influencing their first use prior to them actually using, the influence of advertisements or packaging on them, the location of their first use, its relationship to other substance use, including tobacco use, influences of family, friends, peers, significant others, stress. A few individuals did mention unpleasant first experiences, and several also said they weren't sure how they started. So of all those screener participants, 31.6% of the positive first experience group completed a survey, and 19% of the immediate habit group completed a survey. That gave us a final subsample of 44 who took the main survey and fell into those 2 groups. And so those are the 44 are who I'm going to be presenting on for the rest of the results. So about a third of the positive first experience group used the term love when discussing their first time using. This was described as loving the flavor, taste, or feeling at first use. So one participant said, "I had my first black and mild in high school. I absolutely loved the smell and taste. From then on, I became a smoker." Others described falling in love. They used the term fell in love, I fell in love to it, I'm falling in love with it. And one said, "I started on my 18th birthday. I went and got a pack of Swisher Sweets and just fell in love with them." And others described loving their first experience in general. "I remember loving the smell of black and milds when my uncle smoked them. So I tried my first one at 17 and loved them." The 2/3 of the group used some other form of enjoyment to describe their initiation. These were similar to the love group in that they described liking their first experience in general. This one said, "A friend offered me a black and mild and I smoked some of it and liked it." And the others described specifically liking the taste, flavor, or feeling at that first use. "I was 17 when I started smoking cigars, black and mild wood wine tip. The flavor was amazing and that's what got me hooked, the flavor." In our immediate habit group, about 60% used the term hooked when describing their immediate habit. They said, this one said, "I used to watch my grandpa smoke them on our porch as a kid, and when I came of age to buy one myself, tried a wood tip black and mild, and was hooked ever since." And about a 25% used the term habit, which was what was in the prompt, the term that was in the prompt. So this one said, "I took my first cigar from my dad's stash. I was 12 and it was a habit instantly." So these are just some sample characteristics of the 44 who fell into our 2 groups. About 70% were male, 84% were 21 or over, about 50% identified their race or ethnicity as white, And for Cigarillos use in the past week before the screener, about 90% used 2 to 7 and 9% used more than 7. So descriptions of positive first experiences in this study included the term love, which wasn't found in any of the cigarette literature about positive first experiences. It also, some of the terms, we rarely saw a lot of the terms that were used in the cigarette literature, like buzz or rush or dizziness or any of those terms, weren't seen in the screeners. Cigarette literature discusses potential for dependence as related to first experience, and some of the cigarillo users in this study described an immediate hook in their initiation narrative. So this has implications for the development of health promotion messages. These messages could convey the risks of use of cigarillos while acknowledging that some individuals have positive experiences and maybe make sure those messages can counter those experiences. Also, conveying the risks about the potential for immediate feelings of being hooked can have implications for initiation. Positive first experience descriptions included in these discussions often talked about flavor and taste. And so flavored cigarettes were banned by the FDA in 2009, so extending this ban to cigar products may have an impact on first experiences. And finally, in this study, we asked individuals to describe how they got started, but they weren't prompted to discuss their feelings or whether or not they had positive experiences or to describe some of the terms that they would use for what they felt when they used the first time. So additional research is needed to systematically examine the actual prevalence of positive first experiences, as well as understand why some individuals have a positive first experience.
Awesome. So you survived the gauntlet of the initial findings. Thanks to all our presenters. This is a slide that includes the study team. I just want to acknowledge also in the room with us today, Karen Ishler, Jose Marino, and Rachel Provazek. Sorry, I still stumble over that. Who are here and who could also answer questions for us. But let's just go ahead and open it up, and if you've got questions of any of the presenters or just in general, comments about the study, directions you think you might be going.
I have a question about the social media campaign. I think I saw a number early on the slide that said $240 was spent per day on the advertisement. How many days was that? And is that per platform or is that combined?
240 was combined. I think we spent $20 per day on each ad, and there were 6 ads on each platform. And the campaigns were run over about a 6-week period, a 6-month period, 1 month in each market, roughly.
And how did your team decide on how many dollars should be spent on advertising?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think that, and Rock can speak to this as well, but I think there's a certain amount of trial and error that goes into that process. You know, one of the considerations our team had was just not being overwhelmed. So theoretically you could have run in all these markets at one time for a month and recruited the same number of people. But I don't believe that we felt we had the infrastructure to sort of handle that many screeners coming in. So part of it is how much money you have, and part of it is having an understanding of what the conversion rate is going to be. So if we had been, if it had been more effective in terms of conversion, you may have wanted to back the budget off a little bit, even too many screeners in. So I think it's, and these platforms are really easy to use, and you can change things very quickly on the fly. So you could run it for a couple of days, and you're going to know pretty quickly, like, what the response is, and then you can kind of back off, or you can increase your budget. I know in some cases we would be in a market for a while, and we would start to get saturation in that market, and we would see it start to trail off. Mm-hmm. And then you either pick another market, or maybe you change the communication strategy. Mm-hmm. But one thing that's really nice about these analytics platforms is that you can monitor the effectiveness of the advertising campaign in real time, and you can make changes to it in real time, so you have a lot of flexibility. That's a very good question. It probably depends on what you're doing. So I'm running an intervention study right now where we recruit people for weight loss intervention. The conversion is much lower, right, because you have to have people for 3 months and all these other things. And so you might take a slightly different approach for that. Or if you had something where you need to recruit people very quickly, you might want to spend more money. You know, in our case, I think we knew we had a certain time frame over which we could recruit people, so we could be a little more conservative about the budget.
In the end, were you satisfied with the number of responses you received? Was it on target with what you anticipated?
Well, I'll leave that question to Sue.
More is better.
More is better.
We based the initial budget in the grant application on a publication that had come out close to when we wrote the grant and tried to model what we did after what they did. But our target group is a little trickier in that we were aiming for adolescents. It's very difficult to get ads approved through Facebook and Twitter around tobacco and adolescents. So that was a little tricky. And it's also, I think the conversion rate was lower in that the narrow group of people who we're looking for, they have to smoke some minimum cigarillos and be within this age group was challenging. So we used that as a starting point and then weren't really sure what we were going to get and modified from there. And we're very grateful to have David join the team a little bit after we had started to bring some of that expertise to the group. So it's been helpful. We've learned a lot. We've learned a lot. Yes?
I had a question, 2 questions on the 2 measures of the 2 scales you used to measure how cigarillos are used. Was it comparable in terms of some of the psychometric properties that you might be interested in? Because you said there's no gold standard, how were they comparable in some of the psychometric properties? And the other question is, what was the average time for taking the detailed scale?
With the nature of the questions that we're asking, it's not, you wouldn't use like an internal reliability consistency assessment with those kinds of items. So it really is challenging not having a true gold standard. I suppose some of the methods that are out there is asking individuals to provide you their tips or their butts or whatever the rename is of what they've smoked and put them in a little sealed baggie and date it. I know that some folks have done that along with the reporting of what they, the actual reporting of questions like this of what they've said they smoked. I think that would actually be a gold standard, but you can imagine some biases and who the heck does that and follows the instructions, right? So between the two, we would probably argue that the detailed approach is a more accurate measure. Erica has pointed to a publication that says the higher, whatever generates a higher estimate, perhaps is the more accurate one. But in terms of psychometrics, those kinds of things would be relevant for a measure of coping expectancies or something like that, but not necessarily for this kind of reporting. In terms of how long it took, Rock, do you have an estimate on that?
Well, it's a little tough to say exactly how long the measure specifically took because we've got numbers for how long it took to take the survey overall, but there's other things that factor into that. But typically and besides that, we've got overall survey number, duration, but then also different people took multiple amount reporting because certain people use certain products, certain people use other ones, certain people use 3 products, certain people only use 1. So it's a little tough to say, but typically our surveys took around 15 to 20 minutes overall. So you could say out of that, it's going to be a big chunk or a little chunk out of that, but you've got that compared to literally 2 questions for the conventional method.
Was there an incentive for taking the survey, and then after completing the survey, was there any follow-up for quit line or any other additional resources for people if they were interested?
Yeah, there was an incentive. It ended up being $15. Yeah, originally, I think we had it at 20 or 25, and then we got hit by a bot. So we recognized that it was too much of an incentive for the amount of task that was being completed. And we could talk about that a little bit more if folks are interested, but hence the very labor-intensive two-stage process and adding a very nice open-ended question, which computers are not very good at doing on their own, and kind of it takes a human input. But it generated a nice manuscript that has the best title ever. Yeah, so that was the incentive. What was your other question? Oh, assistance. We did not follow up with these folks. It's cross
follow up, but just like a blanket resource.
With this population, with this age group, they're not really looking to quit. The majority of them, we did not want to come across as we wanted to come across as in a way that we were asking them for their input and their feedback on these products. Not pro-product, not anti, but trying to be neutral about it, and certainly didn't want to convey that we're asking them because we're going to want to ask them to quit. So we did not link to any resources at the end. There were other opportunities for folks to do additional pieces, and I alluded to one of them, which was providing a saliva sample for us. The other piece was to complete the survey again, so we could do a test, retest, reliability. So those were the only two ways that we reached back out to folks.
To the last presenter, I guess a comment and a question. There seemed to be a wide range of very powerful emotional words associated with this. One being love, which I associate with, it's a pretty important activity in life in general, to an agnostic habit, to a more negative hook. I'm hooked. So I just find that interesting, all in the same, experience pool. The question, though, is, was there some other social activity going on to influence this person's positive, or I guess perhaps negative, in terms of I'm hooked, at the time of their, smoking a cigarillo? Were they at a party? Were they at a funeral? Were they, because sometimes I think, the reason I ask that question is sometimes if you're having a good time, you're more apt to like something that you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we don't have that much detail about these individuals, or except for what they put in those, as you saw those quotes, those were the entire response from that individual. So some of them did mention being at a party, some of them mentioned family or friends using before, and they've already grown to like, as the one quote, like the smell prior to their first time using, and then they tried it, they loved it, they were hooked. So we do have some of that, but not, I haven't looked systematically at those individuals to see about those, if I can see from the narratives, whether there are some of those social or contextual characteristics. That would be an area to look at within those narratives.
I had a question, David, for you about the impression. So Facebook is wider audience, but there were more impressions on Twitter than Facebook. So I was just curious why that was.
There's just a lower conversion rate, so why that is, I'm not sure. I could tell you in the other study that I'm doing, Facebook was very successful and Twitter was completely not successful. So why that is the case, I'm not sure.
I was just curious. I'm wondering if it's an algorithm of Facebook or Twitter, like that they were hitting more people on Twitter than they were in Facebook, or maybe there's more data.
Yeah, so I think, so let me kind of explain how the pricing for this works. So there are several different ways that you can purchase advertisements. The method that we use, that I think is most commonly used, is that you pay per response. So what happens is that, as an example, I would say to Facebook, I want to spend $20 a day And what Facebook does is it just serves impressions up until you get enough responses that it can charge you the $20. So you're not paying for impressions, you're paying for clicks. And it's probably the case that Twitter just needed to deliver more impressions to get the same number of clicks. It depends on what you're doing. So if you're, let's say you were trying to promote a health message, but there's no call to action, so anti-smoking message, then you'd be mostly concerned about the number of impressions that you delivered, because presumably the message is getting out there. If it's something like this where you want people to actually do something, you're more apt to pay for clicks.
One other question about the survey. Did you always put the questions in the same order, or did you do any kind of mixing up? Like, I'm just wondering if you got, like, I would think there's some fatigue after, like, oh, Monday, and now I've got to tell you about Tuesday and Wednesday and this product and this one. Did you ever rotate it around?
We did not. Between two different versions, we perhaps had some different ordering of questions, but we did, within this current administration, we did not. It is, if folks are smoking multiple products, and I want to say it's over 50% are smoking both cigarettes and cigarillos. I don't know, Karen, do you know that off the top of your head? So you would have to fill that out, that detailed information for both of those products. If you also share, sometimes you're filling it out again. So I think it actually goes pretty quickly, but the more different products you smoke and the different kinds of activities you engage in, it does create a lot. But I don't think anybody else has this level of detail. So I think it's helpful to begin to look at some of the variability in patterns of use. And I think we've just started to scratch the surface between doing the conventional versus the detailed approach in assessing the amount. There's probably more that we can do with that.
I was just going to sort of piggyback on that too, to follow up on the gentleman's question in the back. While we don't have the ability to look at internal consistency or reliability within the measure at present, we do have the ability to look at over time. So we have a 1 week retest for about 100 participants at this point, but we will be able to then look at retest reliability for each of the different measures and see how they hold up over time, which will give us some insight into the psychometrics.
Great point. Great point. Okay. So as you can see, there's a lot of different measures that we've included in this, and there's more to dig into. There are two things that I will mention on which we could use some help. One, we still have the survey open. We have probably about 70% of our respondents are young adults. So we would love to have some more adolescents represented, and we define adolescents as 14 to 18-year-olds. And the other thing is that we are collecting saliva samples. That has been a little bit of an adventure, having not ever done this before, but I think we have a great system in place. Currently, if folks at the end of the survey indicate that they're interested, we package up a kit and we send them off a little kit that they can provide us a saliva sample, a prepaid envelope, and it comes back. We're going to be moving to doing some community-based data collection. Again, this would be limited to the 18 to 28-year-olds because that's what we have the IRB approval to do, is with the adults. But if folks have suggestions or recommendations, and I know that we've tapped some of you already for ideas, but I thought I'd just go ahead and mention it again. We're at 48, so we're just about halfway there. We said we were going to collect 100. They actually they get reimbursed for doing the survey at $15, and completing the saliva kit is $25. So there is a little bit more remuneration for doing that extra activity. But if folks have thoughts or ideas on that, or you're interested in the project and want to get the word out, we do have some palm cards that you can feel free to distribute or hand out, or if you're familiar with a corner or a place where you think there's a lot of folks who are using cigarillos, feel free to take some of these. But also, I can put my email address up here, and if you want to contact me or anybody else on the study team, we certainly would welcome your thoughts and ideas. Some of you may be students in the room or just have an interest. We have a lot of data. If this is something of interest to you, and you'd like to get involved in some way, or you have some questions that you'd like to see if they're answerable with this data set, please join us. We have a lot of stuff. But with that, thanks to all of our presenters. Thanks to our team members. A lot of folks behind the scenes to really make this happen, so I really appreciate your input. Next month, we have Dr. Borowski returning, and we'll be presenting on the impact study. I think that's probably going to be a team presentation too, but very much looking forward to that. So if you didn't sign in, please sign in. And otherwise, we will see you next month. Thanks.